Hello, I'm Eric Reynolds, the Bandana Man, and today we're going to talk about rock shelters and what to do if you're misplaced and night's coming on, maybe there's a storm coming in. Can you shelter in a rock shelter like this? Or is that not a good idea? What do you do? How do you make a decision? Well, first things first, let's talk about that. One of the first rules of survival is never waste precious energy. Remember, a rock shelter like this that's got maybe a few drippy spots or a couple wet spots is better than being stuck out in the rain. And you don't want to waste lots of energy because in a survival situation, that's a commodity that's scarce. So if you have the opportunity to use a rock shelter, use it. But first you have to decide if it's safe. Now, however, before we even get started, let's have the legal disclaimers. Okay, rock shelters like this have been used for thousands of years by Native Americans and people after that as shelters. You don't want to disturb, deface, or dig in a rock shelter. Don't ever do that because many of these are archaeological sites. And if you dig or disturb them, you ruin the archaeological history. So don't do it. It's also a crime. So having said that, and getting back to what do you do if you have an emergency? First off, a rock shelter like this, never stay in a rock shelter unless it is an emergency or you've already asked the landowner's permission. If you got that or it's an emergency, that's fine. But if it is an emergency and you need to have that shelter for the night because the storm's coming in, you have to first decide, is this place safe? So before you even go in, what you're going to want to do is you're going to take a look at that rock shelter. Now, I can take a look in here and I can see that there's nothing inside here, okay? If I had a flashlight, I could scan it with me and look over on the inside. What you want to do to determine if there's anything in here is you want to stop, look, and listen before you enter. Okay, you want to listen for denning animals in the spring and summer. In the winter, you want to listen for evidence of hibernating animals. You might want to throw a rock or two into the cave. Snakes and things like that will react to the vibrations, and you might be able to see if there's any snakes in there. You can also throw a stick in there, like that, see if anything moves. Okay, nothing's moving. All right? You want to look at the ground to see if there's any scat or guano. Those are sure signs that someone already lives there. If you have a flaming torch, you can use that because snakes, while they won't react, or bats for that matter, won't react to the beam of a flashlight, will react to the flames and heat of a torch. Okay? But now I don't see any scat, I don't see any guano, and nothing's moved when I threw the rock and the stick in there, so I think I'm pretty good. The next thing, though, that you want to do is you want to determine if the rock wall here is safe. Rock shelters are formed when you have a hard overlaying rock that's formed on top of a softer rock that, in this case, is completely eroded out, okay, which is what's created the overhang. But that doesn't mean that all the pieces of this roof are perfectly attached, okay? What you want to do is take a stick or a walking stick if you have it, and you want to bang the roof. Hear that nice sound? Okay, that's a nice sound. But listen to this one. It's a little bit duller. It's a little bit softer sounding. And when I did that, some gravel fell off, okay? That means the rocks at the back part of that are probably not as stable as you'd really want. So you don't want to be camping in the back part of this cave. But the front part here is nice and safe, okay? So now you've determined the rock structure is safe and that there's no animals in it, okay? The next thing you want to do is look for signs of water, okay? Is there any water in it? A few drops and drips and wet spots are natural and to be expected. But what you don't want to see, and in this case it's rain tonight, and this cave right here is perfectly dry inside, so there's no even damp spots. But what you don't want to see, and you don't want to shelter in, is a cave that's really wet even when it's been dry, because that means there's a spring that's coming out through the rock cave. Could make for a bad night if it rains, okay? The other thing you want to check out for is lightning. You have to be careful of lightning when you're staying in caves. A cave at the base of a short cliff like this cliff is only probably about 50 feet tall, is pretty safe. It's also in a heavily wooded area, so the chances of lightning hitting the top of this cliff is pretty thin, and it's going to hit the trees long before it hits this cliff face. But let's say this was a taller cliff, and this rock shelter was at the base of it. A really tall cliff would not be as safe because it could take a lightning strike, and the lightning could travel down the cliff face, jump to the ground, and go right through where you're sitting. And that wouldn't be very safe for you. That could really permanently end your wilderness adventures. So you have to look for that. Look for a small cliff with a rock shelter underneath it in a heavily wooded area. Those are the best. Okay? Check to make sure there's no occupants, and check to make sure it's not too wet. Those are all the things you want to do to determine if it's safe. Now the next thing is warming up your shelter. You need to create some heat for your shelter. A lot of people will build their fire too close inside, and all that they get there is they get a lot of smoke in there, and they also heat up the rock shelter's roof. You want to make sure your fire stays away from the roof and the walls of the rock shelter whenever possible, because as the heat warms that rock shelter up and it cools down and warms up, you could actually create more cracks in the roof, which could then tumble tons of rock down on you, and that's not what you want. So what you need to do is take a page out of the journals from the early Native Americans who used these shelters for the last thousands of years. The archaeological record is pretty clear. In most of the rock shelters that have been excavated, the hearths are always under the drip line. Now, in this particular shelter, the drip line is right around here. And you can see that this hearth, which I didn't build, it was actually already here, is right under the drip line, which is perfect, okay? That's where you want to situate it. And then you want to build a nice reflector of rocks or logs or whatever, rocks are being better, here to reflect the heat back into your cave, okay? Now, this is how you want to set up your fire. You want to have a reflector, fire, and then the rest of the rock cabin with you in the middle, okay? So reflector, fire, you, the back wall of the cavern. What that'll do is that the heat will bounce off these rocks into here, and it'll come shooting out of the fire this way. It'll bounce off the back of the rock shelter back at you and keep your backside warm. If you put the fire in here and you stepped out here, your backside's going to be cold. That's not a good situation. So again, remember, reflector, fire, you, cave shelter. It'll get nice and warm in here. And this rock shelter, this reflector actually in front of my rock shelter will actually help channel the smoke up the cliff face, and it won't come into my face and choke me out during the night. So it's a really good setting. So, just as a thing to remember, whenever you're going to build a fire in a rock shelter, you always make sure that you find the drip line right up here. You build a reflector, and you keep your fire small. A big bonfire, all that's going to do is waste a lot of wood, make you have to sit far away from it because it's too hot, and it runs the risk of catching or warming the rock up so much that you have a rock fall. That you don't want that. So always keep your fire small. So find the drip line, build a reflector, keep your fire small, and sit between the cave and your fire, and you're good. If you enjoyed this video, check out an article on my blog called Rock Shelters and Half Caves That Home Away from Home. And as always, thank you to my cameraman for filming this. And if you enjoyed my video, subscribe. If you like my articles, follow me. And until next time, happy trails.